Greetings everyone, I hope you are well. Down below in the description box, you will find a link to the merch store, which hosts items for the Back to Ashes channel. Also, if you feel so inclined and like what you are hearing, you can also buy me a coffee, as every donation helps the channel and myself out. I appreciate each and every one of you. With that being said, it is time for your dose of vocal melatonin. Today, I introduce someone that I like to call my brother in horror. It is my pleasure to introduce the Grim Reaper's Nightmare. Now, it's time to go back to ashes, for when we arise from the ashes, we are a better, stronger, and happier person. Tuck in, get warm, and enjoy these true, creepy encounters.
I was little. My family had neighbors who were one house over. The father and the teenage sons were psychopaths who tormented us. The son stole my dad's bike, so he went to confront the father. This led to the father killing our pets and leaving a creepy plate of rice and a dead crow outside our door. Then, sometime later, the teenage son tried to break into my bedroom in the middle of the night. I posted this on my old account years ago, but I found out some more information. Quick warning, there is violence against animals mentioned in this tale. When I was in 1st through 2nd grade, the neighbors at the end of the block terrorized my family, and their son terrorized our next-door neighbors. They were a family that we were close with. I'll start with that first. Junior, the teenage psychopath, was friends with their son, who was the same age. My brother and I were always there playing with their daughter, who was my age. Our mums were very close. The mum was Maria, and she was very pretty. One day her son told us he was going to kill Junior. Maria had told my mum that Junior had been peeping in her window. She decided to film him to get evidence because she kept finding something white on her windows. She found out that Junior was masturbating to her undressing. He would then wipe his semen all over the window. This was before our family had problems with his family. One day, my dad, an avid cyclist, noticed his very expensive bike was missing. He saw Junior riding it around the neighborhood. He'd stolen it out of our garage. My dad went to his father and told him to get his son to give his bike back. His father yelled at my dad and denied Junior stole anything. Luckily, he left the bike in their driveway and my dad took it back and kept it in the basement. A few days later, someone knocked on our back door and my dad looked outside to see a plate of rice with a dead crow on it. He called the police, but since he didn't see who put it there, they didn't do anything. When we would go out, we'd leave our bunny and guinea pig in their cage outside to get fresh air. My mum, brother and I were only out for a short period of time and my dad was in the basement. When we got home, we went straight to our backyard and had a fence and big bushes in the back. Our kiddie pool had been out and this is what we found. Our bunny had been drowned in the pool and our guinea pig was thrown over the extremely high bushes into an alley. It was devastating. Piglet, our guinea pig, was still alive and my mum took her to the animal hospital. She had severe internal bleeding and her bones were broken. She had to be put to sleep. I can't believe the cruelty all over my dad confronting Junior's dad over the bike. My mum went over to their house and confronted the father. He readily admitted doing it, saying they were just animals. He did it with a friend. I can't remember how my parents figured it out. I think Maria's mother saw them in our backyard. The police were called, but nothing happened. That wasn't the end though. One night, woke up to my dog Wrinkles going crazy. She was sleeping on my bed. My bed was facing my windows. Then I heard knocking, and I also heard a male voice saying something about coming in. He also called me a bitch, and I also heard motherfucker. Then I saw Junior. I ran into my parents' room crying hysterically, saying someone was trying to get in my room. My dad went outside and saw one of our patio chairs outside my very open window. He called the police. They searched outside my window and saw shoe prints. The cops thought there might be 2 people because of how many shoe prints were on the ground. They went into the neighbor's house, but his mother said that Junior wasn't home. He was out with friends. I bet they were in his house, but the police couldn't search it. I was traumatized afterwards, and my bed was moved so I couldn't see the windows. I was terrified to be home at night. My parents brought lights that you run along the entire house and around the patio to my window. I still get afraid at night if the blinds are open. Nothing happened to Junior because there was no evidence it was him, plus someone in his family was a cop. It explains why he wasn't sent to jail for what he did to Maria, who actually had it on camera. I also forgot to mention that my mum was talking to his mum before any of this started, and his mum referred to her husband as the man. She hated him and joked about poisoning his food. He died of a heart attack shortly after Junior tried climbing in my window. We have always thought that she finally ended up poisoning him.
So, me and my boyfriend like going out dancing on the weekend, which always ends with us stumbling into our favorite pizza place before joining the taxi queue. We've done this most weekends for over a year now, so have become somewhat friendly with the guys who own the pizzeria. They know us by name and always make a big fuss over us and offer us a discount every time. Now, here's where it gets freaky. Last night, a Sunday night, at 11 p.m., my boyfriend and I were in bed because we both had work this morning. My phone started ringing, which was weird for that time of night, and I saw it was an unknown number, so I ignored it. Next thing we know, there's someone knocking on the front door. All the lights in the house were off, so we were clearly in bed, or not in. I had another call from the same number, and then the person knocking started hammering on the door and flicking the letterbox. My boyfriend got up to answer it, even though I was a bit shaken up, and warned him not to. If I had been alone in the house, I never would have answered. So, he goes downstairs to answer the door, and lo and behold, it's one of the guys from the pizzeria holding 2 freshly cooked pizzas that we didn't order. He said not to tell the other guys at the shop, but they were a gift from him to us, his favorite customers. My boyfriend took them from him and thanked him, but we couldn't get back to sleep for hours. We just felt so odd about it. We have ordered from there once for a takeaway, so that's clearly how he got our address and my phone number. But it's still weird, right? A couple years ago, my cousin rushed into getting married to this man, Anthony. He was a Marine. He was attractive, smart, and charismatic, like too charming, and he convinced my cousin to run away and get married without her family approval. Our family wasn't very accepting of him marrying my cousin because he was very emotionally controlling. He was a perfectionist. He tried to force my cousin into a mold of a perfect wife. She had to have daily weigh-ins where he checked to see if her body weight went up. He would make her go on extremely dangerous diets. And one day, when they went to marriage counseling, he told the counselor that he used to tie up his neighbor's baby kitten and beat them up with a bat until their heads exploded. My cousin was so scared of leaving him because he was an experienced sniper expert in the Marines. He had blue belt in mixed martial arts. He was a giant compared to her. I was going to school for human services. I always wanted to help the community out. So, I was getting my certificate in post-traumatic stress disorder aid worker, a certificate to help people out during traumatic events. He laughs at me and says there's no way the FBI would let a retard like you into their program. Well, I told him during a family gathering that I didn't like his tone of voice towards me. I said I studied criminal psychology, and I told him because of my disability, it made me the best person to learn about the human brain, because I had to learn how to walk and talk, and because of my autism, I have a brain that doesn't stop thinking and processing all kinds of information about the world around me. I told him that he was a psychopath who gets pleasure out of causing people fear through threats and intimidation, and most serial killers started with small animals until they started attacking people, and I said his ability to detach from his emotions during stressful situations made him the most dangerous person. And ever since then, I convinced my cousin to eventually leave him, because I knew that one day, if she didn't leave him, he would kill her, because he always wanted to have control over her. And since then, it has caused me stress when thinking about dating someone, because he looked like a normal person, attractive, charming, and a well-liked guy, until you got to know him, and suddenly, a switch went off, and his eye would go blank and give me the psychopath stare. So it was summer of 2012. I was 30 at the time, and I had gotten off work that Friday afternoon. Typical evening came along for me. Went out to go to the local tavern, and I always cut up through the park. Well, I was walking through the park. I came across this guy that was sitting on one of the park benches, and I walked past him. Mind you all, I never once seen this guy in my life, and as I walked past him, he said my name and asked how I was doing. I looked at the guy, and something right off the bat seemed off about this dude. His smile seemed off. The vibe in general just didn't feel right. So I said to the guy, hey, I'm sorry, but do I know you? Have we met before? And avoiding my question, he asked me again how I was. I then said to the guy, I'm good, man, thanks for asking, and walked away. As I walked away and looked back, he still had that smile on his face. I went to the tavern for a bit and came back to my neighborhood, and on the corner by my house was that same guy. So as I walked past him, he started giving me that disturbing smile and greeted me saying my name. I didn't say anything back, but instead of going through my front door, I walked around the block to the top of my alley and walked down to my backyard. I went through my back door to get into my house. I had trouble sleeping that night and would look out the front window with the lights off from time to time to see if he was still there. And eventually around 2 a.m., he finally left. Paranoid? Maybe. But if you had seen this guy, you would know something about him was off. Just after 1 a.m., I was sitting in my living room watching Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, browsing Reddit, the most boring Saturday night ever. And then, someone's knocking. I live with my brother, and there's a guy who visits him sometimes, so I assumed it was him and just opened the door. There before me was a random man in his 40s, looking kind of sus, saying, "Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm looking for a taxi place." So I said town center, and he kept apologizing, asking if he woke the kids. He's also very close to my door. Also, I don't have any kids, but I said yes, hoping he'd F off. I was scared that if I tried to close the door, he'd push it in. I got really anxious as I started shaking. He goes on about the taxi again and says, "Can I ask you a question? I got divorced yesterday. You were beautiful." Just then a car was driving by, so I said thanks. I tried to be polite so he wouldn't get angry and aggressive, and shut the door. I just stood there by my window to make sure he left. Jesus, how was I so stupid? That could have ended badly. Especially because I live in a crappy area, and my brother wears headphones all the time. Why was he asking about kids? To see if I was alone? I noticed he went in the direction the car was coming, so I don't know if it was a random car or if someone picked him up. Was he a thief or just drunk? I had the lights on, so he knocked? I really hope it's just that. I really hope I start thinking before doing anything else like that again. So this happened at my previous job. Howard was a senior on my team. One day during chit-chat, he asked me to recommend some colognes to him, as I know a lot about perfumes and fragrances. I recommended some, and then he asked me to help him buy it. I suggested it's better to try it out in person before buying for colognes, but he insisted many times that I buy my recommendation for him. So I did eventually. After I bought it, I WhatsApp him the receipt. He texted back, "Thanks, I'll treat it as a gift from you. LOL. He did pay me back later, so I thought he was just making a joke. The manager of my previous team, Alfred, asked me to go grab a drink after work another day as he noticed I was frustrated at work lately. He also said I could invite more people if I wanted. So I invited Kate, my closest friend in the company, who also was on Alfred's team. Kate suggested me to invite one more colleague as she believed it was better to hang out in a group of 4. I think for a bit and invited Howard, as he had worked under Alfred before. I told Howard that Alfred wanted to buy us all drinks. I have drinks with Kate and another colleague, Aiden, together regularly after work, so that was the first time I hung out with either Alfred or Howard. After the drinks, we decided to take the last scheduled subway home. only Howard and I live in the same direction. I knew he lived near stop A from previous chit-chat, which is 10 stops before my stop. I live quite far away from the subway station. It's a 1-hour walking distance, so I planned to take a taxi after getting off at my stop. After we got on the subway, Howard started to say things that made me uncomfortable. For instance, he asked me when he could become as close to me as Aiden, or rather Aiden had ever been to my apartment. To be honest, I wasn't even that close with Aiden, and we were more like work friends. I was annoyed by all those questions, but I thought to myself, it's just a few more stops until stop A. I'd have my peace soon. Howard didn't get off at stop A. I asked him about it, to which he replied he had some errands near stop B tomorrow morning, so he'd be staying at a friend's near stop B. Stop B is just 1 stop before mine. Luckily, Howard shut up soon, probably because of my lack of response, so I just looked at my phone in silence. I just noticed Howard was still there when I was about to get off at my stop. He followed me off the subway and offered to take a taxi together. He said he'd drop me off at my place and then go to his friend's place, which would make no sense as these 2 drop-off points are in complete opposite directions at my subway stop. I declined by saying I planned to walk home. He didn't know where I lived. Then he offered to walk me home. I said it's an hour away and persuaded him to just get a taxi outside my subway stop. He finally budged and called a taxi through the app, which shows the estimated fare. I overheard him murmuring the amount, which was definitely more than traveling from my subway stop to stop B. More like traveling to stop A. I suspected the stay at his friend thing was a lie all along just to follow me home. A week later, Kate told me she overheard Howard insinuated to Alfred that we were in a relationship. We were in a profession where a relationship between staff was required to be reported, and spouses cannot work in the same team. I was creeped out by Howard, but didn't bring it up to Alfred, as he didn't ask me about it either. A month later, Alfred invited his team and a lot of other people he previously worked with to dinner to celebrate the end of a project. After the meal, Alfred asked me where I was heading to, as he knew I have 2 apartments. Kate and Howard were walking with us. I told Alfred I'm going back to the apartment in the same direction of Kate's, which was in the opposite direction as Howard's. Howard joined in the conversation and said he's going to that direction too, as a friend was hosting a party there. Kate and I were doubtful, surely. On the subway, Kate asked him where was the party, and Howard replied stop C, which was exactly my stop. So Kate and I pretended we had other places to hang out, and I was not getting off at stop C. Howard got off at stop C eventually, and I rode with Kate to her stop and then got on another subway back to stop C. I avoided him as much as possible before I finally quit my job. I'll preface this with some info. This is the first time anything like this has happened to me, so please forgive me if I sound nervous. My girlfriend and I slept in separate rooms for several months due to disruptive sleep patterns for both of us. I slept in the same bed as her for a little over a year, and throughout many sleepless nights, I've only ever heard her mumble in her sleep, no clear words. Last night, we decided to sleep together in the bed for the first time in months. We had no issue falling asleep, but I woke up in the middle of the night, of course. I was coming out of a sleep when I clearly heard my girlfriend say out loud, 3:17. I thought for a second and said, "What?" She repeated herself clearly and said, 317, again. I thought it was strangely specific, so I rolled over and picked up my phone. It was 316. I got really nervous and woke my girlfriend up. She had no recollection of what time it was, and no recollection of having said anything. She claimed she wasn't having any dreams, and I've asked several times if she was messing with me, and she denies ever trying to mess with me. My girlfriend hasn't ever been the type to pull pranks on me. I stayed awake for about 20 minutes afterwards because I was very nervous. My girlfriend also stayed awake for a while after I recounted everything to her because it also made her feel somewhat creeped out. It was truly bizarre, and I have no explanation for it. She often wakes up and checks her phone in the middle of the night. I considered this, but it still doesn't explain why she would be saying 317 when the time was only 316. I thought about it all day, and still to this day, it still gives me the creeps. I have a lot of distance from the situation now, so I finally feel comfortable posting about this. When I lived in Boulder, Colorado, I was living in a motel-style off-campus apartment building. It was mostly students living there, and I was on the first floor. There was a large window right above my bed. There were many signs that the stalker was watching me for months before I fully realized the situation that I was in. It started with a few stolen packages here and there, a disposable camera stolen from my car, a random movie poster left in my car that absolutely none of my friends had ever seen before, and most notably, a man in a bright orange hoodie with his hood up walking back and forth past my living room window about 20 times one day. I was on the phone with my boyfriend when I noticed him at first, and I made a comment to him about it, but I figured I was overreacting. 2 months after I noticed him for the first time, my boyfriend was out of town with his family on a trip, so I was watching his dog for him. I woke up earlier than normal to go walk her, around 6 a.m. Afterwards, I laid in bed on my phone. At one point, around 6:30 a.m., I looked up from my phone, and the same man in the same bright orange hoodie was standing over my bed, looking at me through the window. We were basically a foot apart, the wall and the window being the only thing in between us. I was frozen in shock, and he did not leave. He continued to stare at me for about 30 seconds, and then walked away. I immediately hid under my bed and called the police. I put 2 and 2 together and realized all of these coincidences probably were not coincidences, and he may have been coming by and watching me sleep every morning and possibly at night for months. This was the first time I acknowledged him, and he seemed excited about it. The police told me to close all my blinds and to get a camera. Thanks for the help. They said this was common in Boulder, considering both the high student and homeless population. The man didn't look homeless, though. He also didn't fit the description of anyone who lived in my building. The police officers had checked with my building manager, so that meant he was coming from somewhere else, specifically just to watch me sleep. I did as I was told and closed all my blinds. However, about 2 hours after the police officers left, he came back and banged on my window, and then tried to open my door, which always automatically locked. I was absolutely terrified. I called the police again and left town to go be with my boyfriend and his family for the next few days. When I got back, I never planned to stay at my apartment alone at night but I figured I could unpack my things as it had been a few days, and he probably noticed that I was gone. Within the hour of me being back, so was he. And this time, he held up a camera through the one crack in my blinds that I had, and held up a knife behind the camera, slowly walking by and making sure I saw. I saw all right. I called the police for a third and final time, then made an official police report, and I moved out of my apartment within the week. I never saw him again, but from time to time, I did check my old apartment's reviews on Google, because they tried to charge me $1,800 to leave while knowing about the situation, which I thought was insane. Colorado laws protect stalking victims from these fees, though. Anyway, I checked recently, considering what the Idaho killer had been up to, and how much it reminded me of my own situation. I saw a review about a man chasing girls around with a knife, and the building doing nothing about it. It was from a parent, and I reached out to her personally on Facebook. The same man in the bright orange hoodie attacked her daughter in the parking lot at 4 a.m. with a knife. He tried to stab her as she was getting in her car. He stabbed her car when he failed to do so, and then tried to slash her tires as she started to back out to escape. The creepiest thing above all, he was never caught and remains at large. I worked at a store that was very close to my house, so I walked home every day. The map of this story is, there's my job, my friend's job, a traffic light, a small park, another traffic light, 3 abandoned stores, and finally, a gas station. The only busy part of this route is the gas station. One day, I was leaving work, and it was starting to get dark. When I left, there was an employee fixing the electrical box of the store that my friend works at. I glanced at him, not thinking anything of it, and waved to my friend. She smiled through the glass door, and I continued on my way. It was just another normal day. When I was exactly in the middle of the park, I glanced quickly over my shoulder, because I'm an anxious woman, and saw the electrician who I just saw working at my friend's store. Everything I'm getting ready to tell you happened very quickly. When I looked back again, his eyes were fixed on me, and he had no expression on his face. All the alarm bells were going off in my head, so I started walking at a faster pace, more out of paranoia than real fear. So I looked again, this time more slowly, and I noticed that his steps increased in speed, just like mine. His expression had also changed to anger and impatience, like a hunter frustrated because the little rabbit ran too fast. I think deep down, our survival instinct knows when someone wants to do something bad to us, just by looking at them. I hadn't started running yet, but the park, which was usually small, suddenly got much bigger. I don't know if when I looked back a third time my fearful expression gave me away, but instead of walking, he began to almost run and walk at the same time, his strides becoming so long that it was awkward to look at. And so, I began to run. I had seen this 1,000 times on the news. The park was empty. It was just me and him. I knew what he wanted to do. I had my phone in my hand, but the adrenaline was telling me to keep running and running. I ran the light and crossed the street, still not daring to look back. Maybe he was right behind me. What would I do? I thought after arriving at the abandoned stores, he would have given up, so I looked back one last time. And there he was. Still not running, just walking super fast in a weird way. The adrenaline made me run even faster. and when I looked again after a while, he had suddenly stopped. The guy just stood there, his angry expression also fading away. His face looked blank. It was like he was staring into nothing. But his eyes were still fixed on me. At this point, I was already approaching the gas station, and he was just a small silhouette that didn't move. My heart was still racing, and my hand was shaking so badly, I could barely type the password into my cell phone. I kept walking and looking back every second. He didn't move an inch. I started to get paranoid, thinking that maybe he really was an employee, that maybe I was imagining things, that he wasn't really following me. It's like our brain starts to justify the situation so that you stop suffering. When I was already at the end of the gas station and the adrenaline was slowly decreasing, my boss called me and asked if I had arrived home yet. I said no. He said that my friend next door was worried about me because there was a crazy man pretending he had tools in his hand and pretending he was fixing the power box. She was too scared to tell him to stop and just watched his weird mimicking for a while. But when I passed by, he turned and followed me as if he was literally waiting for me. My friend was so scared that she tried to record the man in case something happened and was ready to call the police. After that episode, I changed the route I did for work and even started to use a bike. To everyone out there, don't forget to always stay alert of your surroundings. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't realized quickly enough that he was following me. He could have reached me within seconds. Hello everyone. This has been ongoing for some time, but tonight it got particularly weird. Some context. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I live on the second story of my building, across from a big city. We have lots of houseless people in my area, and there's a safe injection site right next to my home. I'll mention right off the bat that I have been homeless within my lifetime, from age 8 to 10, and grew up in the care of an addict. I completely empathize with folks who are having a tough go at things. However, I also value my safety, and my neighbor's safety for that matter, so I will preemptively apologize if at any point I sound frustrated at this ongoing situation. I'm mad at the situation that has plagued both the life of myself and the homeless man who is tormenting my building. This all started about a year ago, when my partner and I were nearly attacked by this homeless person while downstairs in our parking lot. To summarize the situation, we had just gotten home where my partner was going to drop me off. We didn't live together at the time. We kind of do now, but only on the weekends. And as we said our goodnights, we noticed a man pacing in the visitor's parking lot who was seemingly having a rough time. We kept our distance, car doors locked and windows up, and eventually the man got the hint and left. Just to set the scene a bit here, my parking lot has two sections. One is a public or guest parking area. The second is a locked gate with smaller locked doors for residents to safely park overnight. The gate requires a fob entry, and the door has a regular building key. Both were made with metal bars. This is important for later. I got out of the car and proceeded to walk towards the door, key in hand. My partner started up the car, which caused the homeless man to rush back into the parking lot and promptly attack the car. He hopped onto the hood, beating on the windows and trying to rip off the mirrors. I watched in horror as this terrifying situation evolved next to me. a mere 14 feet away. I quickly got my key into the lock and opened the door at lightning speed. The sound of my keys caught the attention of the man, and he promptly sprinted towards me. Thankfully, by this point, I had begun closing the door behind me. By the time he got to me, I slammed the door in his face and stepped backwards while he screamed at me. When my partner realized I was safely behind a locked door, he got into gear and drove away. Moments later, he called me and instructed me to get away from the door and safely upstairs. It was a good thing he did. I felt like I was in freeze mode. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding out of my chest as the homeless person screamed disgusting things at me, most of which revolved around gesturing crudely at his groin and flicking his tongue at me. I finally broke my fear freeze, walked away as he chanted, pretty lady want a taste, huh?" Those words are burned into my memory. I rushed upstairs and quickly closed the blinds of my windows. I heard him still yelling and chanting outside for a good few minutes after. But then, I heard something unusual. A lighter clicking. The silence was deafening as the lighter clicked repeatedly. Eventually, the click stopped and he began laughing. I looked outside, peering through the blinds. I realized he was attempting to set our building's wooden fence on fire. Luckily, it had been raining, so the fence wasn't catching. I quickly hopped on a call with emergency services, who sent a police car and a fire truck. As soon as the cop car pulled up, the homeless guy went ballistic and started screaming bloody murder. They apprehended him quickly and took him away in the ambulance. Months passed with no sign of him, but one day, a resident in my building reported being attacked by a man who matched his description. After that incident, we, the residents, repeatedly heard him screaming, crying, moaning, and laughing at least 3 times a week outside our building, generally at night. He also started trashing and damaging people's cars when they parked in the guest parking lot. Thankfully, we installed a new gate last week that closes off the guest parking lot, another fob-activated gate. The thing is, as soon as the gate got installed, the man left us alone. It has been a quiet week. It's been nice. But tonight, about an hour ago I was laying in bed scrolling on TikTok when I heard what sounded like soft sobbing. At first, I thought it was coming from TikTok, but after some scrolling, I realized it was coming from outside. I looked outside, and there he was, sobbing and pacing around in the back alley. He suddenly switched gears though, and started jogging while groaning loudly, and continued to cry while occasionally hitting and attacking the new fence we installed. He has seemingly left now, but I'm terrified at his new habit. I'm really hoping he doesn't start crying outside my building routinely. I feel really bad for the guy, and I also feel bad making this story, but the whole situation is really freaking me out. I don't feel safe in my own home, and my apartment complex will do nothing about it. I'm normally a nighttime walker because I have a cat that roams as well. I sometimes like to make sure he's okay or that the roads are clear. I don't want to get into more details about my cat being outdoors, but I do come from a toxic, abusive family dynamic, and they won't allow him indoors. I'm also on disability, so yeah, I'm a loser still living at home. Anyways, I'm 36 years old, and I make sure I'm aware of my surroundings, and I take precautions when walking. I've had randoms stop and ask me a question sometimes, but never experienced something like this. So I walk out at midnight. I normally do a brisk walk and I'm fine. But this time, as I'm reaching the end of the street and I turn back to walk back home, a man in a big white van stops and asks me a question. He asks, what am I doing and where am I going? And I say, I'm walking back home. He then proceeds to suggest I take a lift home from him because he doesn't want to see me walk home alone at late night. I decline his request and tell him to leave me alone and that I can walk home safely if he carries on driving. So he drives his van and then makes a U-turn back to where I'm walking as if to watch me walk home and maybe see where my home is. I stop walking, waiting for him to go past, but he doesn't. And then he also stops his van. He says to me he just wants me to get home safely, and again requested me to get in his van, and I declined. Now I get very angry, and I say, stop following me home. I'm a woman. I can't show you where I live. Then he drives off slowly, but stops at my street, which was right up ahead. I decide to take a U-turn and run into one of the roads where I can hide. He doesn't show up, and I think he's gone, so I come out of hiding. I walk slowly just in case I see him. I then see a car's headlights approaching around the bend, and I quickly jump into this arrangement of big plants on the sidewalk. I easily ducked down, and he didn't see me. I saw his white van driving real slow past me, and he turned into the road I had just come from. He then makes a U-turn and goes back the way he came from. I waited a while, and I felt like a cat at that moment, hiding, waiting for a safe time to come out again. Finally, the coast was clear, and I couldn't see his van anywhere, so I made a run for the house. Thank God I made it home safe and sound. I made sure to look around me and in the shadows to see if he parked his van anywhere, and I didn't see his van. I don't know who that man was, and whether he was really looking out for my safety or whether he was up to something else. I don't know. What do you all think? I sat beside myself now with a cup of tea, trying to process what just happened. I am now terrified to take nightly walks ever again. This happened in 2015. My sister and I are home alone watching Craigslist horror stories on YouTube. A bit ironic, I know. Now for reference, I was 13 while my sister was 17. And having these watch parties had become something of a habit, as it was our last year together before she went off to college. We lived in a safe neighborhood, and nothing had ever really happened at that point that would give us any reason to be anxious about being alone. Anyways, time goes on and my sister suggests we order a pizza, since she's starving. I'm not one to turn down a pizza, so I naturally agree and we place an order at a local pizza place. We continue watching our videos for another 15 to 20 minutes before I step out to use the restroom. Just then, I hear the doorbell ring, followed by my sister getting up to go answer it. So, I carry on with my business with the assumption it was just the pizza. I'd say only 2 minutes had passed as I come back and realize my sister was still at the door, talking with someone. I couldn't really make out what was being said, but I knew it was definitely a man's voice responding to her. As I go to see what's going on, my sister promptly shuts the door, pizza in hand. I initially assumed maybe there was just an issue with the payment, so I just teased my sister for taking so long and go sit down. I know. Who thought a 13-year-old boy could be an oblivious asshole? It didn't take long for me to realize that my sister wasn't eating, despite this whole thing being her idea. And even more so, she had a very nervous look on her face now, and wasn't speaking much. I ask her what was up, and she proceeds to tell me that when she opened the door to greet the pizza guy, he looked at her as if he was checking her out, and followed up by giving her the most unsettling smile she'd ever seen. She was just trying to get the pizza and go as we had already paid online, but the creep insisted on trying to make conversation with her. The man pretended to fumble around trying to get the pizza out of his bag, all while asking very personal questions that he certainly had no business asking, like how old she was and if she was alone. Now, I admittedly thought she was just messing with me. I mean, stuff like that never actually happens to people, you know, right? But, nevertheless, it still left me feeling a bit anxious. We tried to enjoy the food and move on, and I'd say about an hour or two later, we had finally calmed down about the whole thing. Right as we were getting ready to clean up and go back to our own rooms, there was a knock at the door. A very loud and aggressive one at that. We share the same nervous look, then hesitantly slip over to a window to see if we can get a look at whoever's knocking. Now, I hadn't seen the guy, but my sister immediately recognized him as the pizza guy from before. We were contemplating calling the police, but the guy only knocked once or twice more before getting in his car and taking off way too fast down the road. Almost like he knew if he continued, he was more than likely going to end up in a lot of trouble. We made a round around the house, making sure everything was locked up, and then waited for what felt like ages for our parents to finally get home. My sister told them about what happened, but our mom insisted we were just being dramatic, that we had just made ourselves nervous because of the videos we were watching. While we both initially insisted on being serious, we eventually just gave up and tried to move on from the whole thing. We ordered from that place a few more times, but thankfully never saw that same delivery man again. Nothing else ever came of the situation, but I can't help but think about what could have happened if that creep had been just a bit more persistent. What if he had kept trying to get into the house, or if we had accidentally left the door unlocked? I think his intentions were obvious, and I can only hope that his behavior has caught up with him and that he's somewhere getting the help that he most definitely needs. This encounter would have happened a little over 10 years ago. I would have been 26 or 27 years old at the time, but I cannot 100% remember what year this was now. But it was sometime, I think, between 2011 and 2013. At the time, I was frequently going out with my friends to bars and parties, and hanging out until pretty late most weekends. The friend's house that I usually hung out at was on a side street just off a main road, where a lot of popular and crowded bars and restaurants were. You had to park on the street at his house, and during the weekend, when it was busy, it was pretty common to have to park a number of blocks away. The street closer to the bars was pretty nice, but if you went a few blocks in the opposite direction, it got a little sketchier at night. After a night of hanging out, I had to walk back to my car pretty late, which was parked a number of blocks away towards the slightly sketchier area. This was during the winter, so I was wearing some kind of heavy sweater or pullover and beanie or knit hat. This detail is only important, as you couldn't really gather much idea about what I looked like from a distance in the dark, aside from my general height and build. There wasn't much through traffic as you got further away from the bars, and the roads were pretty dark without any streetlights. As I was walking down the sidewalk, a car started slowly creeping down the street, matching my pace as it pulled up beside me and then stopped. The window of the car rolled down, and driving the car was an attractive young woman who said that I looked cold and that I should let her give me a ride to where I was going. She seemed very friendly, I indicated that I wasn't parked far away and appreciated the offer, but was going to just keep walking. She then tried really hard to convince me to get in the car with her since it was so cold. No small talk to establish any information about me to make sure I wasn't a weirdo. Just asking me to get in the car pretty aggressively. Based on what I was wearing and how dark it was, there was no way she really could have had much idea about what I actually looked like to possibly find me attractive. And even if she did, I don't know many women who would pick up a male stranger after midnight when they're alone in their car. There were about 10 bars nearby she could have gone to if she just wanted to pick up a guy. There was no reason I could think of that she would have to resort to driving around, offering to pick up strangers. She continued to drive alongside me and offered me a ride again, which I declined and kept going. I picked up my pace and she eventually drove off. As soon as she was a few blocks away, I quickly got to my car and made sure there was nobody lurking around or close by. The whole scenario felt off and didn't make any sense to me. I asked my friends about it later, and all the women agreed. They wouldn't offer a random guy at nighttime in that kind of scenario, even if the guy looked like Ryan Gosling or Channing Tatum. My suspicion is that there was someone laid down in the back seat of the car, out of view with a weapon, waiting to rob anyone who accepted the ride. I couldn't really figure out any reason she would be offering rides like that to complete strangers in the middle of the night, as it would be very unsafe for her to just pick up random strangers. I just assumed there had to be something nefarious going on in that car. And I do wonder what would have happened if anyone just hopped in the car with her. Be careful out there, everyone. There's some weird folks about. And that, dear listeners, is the end of these true creepy encounters. I hope that you are resting well and Slumberland is treating you sweetly. Until next time, I'll read to you soon. Good night.